Hello and welcome to another episode of the Friday Free for All here on Agency Leadership Live. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, and we've got 5 or 6 topics on tap today to talk about. Everything from rebuilding your business if it's had some issues, shall we say, during the last few months, to what kind of focus you need to have as an agency owner. Should you be focused on money or passion? What software should you be using for accounting? So really a bunch of different things that have come up in coaching conversations that I've had over the past couple of weeks or that I've seen discussed online and amongst other agency owners. So if you're a PR or marketing agency owner, there'll be lots of great content here for you. And well, even if you're not, there may be some things that you can take out of this, nuggets that you can use in your own business or organization. So hopefully you'll enjoy the next little bit that we spend together. And at the end of the show, I'll have an announcement about future episodes and what the plan is for these live streams going forward. I've gotten some really positive feedback out of what I've been doing so far, and so we'll be continuing it and also increasing it. So stay tuned for those details at the end of this stream. So with that, let's start diving right into the topics, because really that's what you're here for. You want to hear about that and not so much me just blathering on here about nothingness. So let's hop on over and we'll take a look at the first topic today, which is a tweet that came out, I think it was last night, from David C. Baker. David is an author and an agency consultant, and he's the author of a really good book that I highly recommend, The Business of Expertise. He's written other books as well, but this is his latest, and it's a great discussion of the issues that you may face when you're running a business that is focused on consulting or agencies or that kind of thing. And in any event, he tweeted out that he was frustrated, shall we say, and you can see his actual language, but he was frustrated with folks who were saying, stop chasing the money and start chasing the passion. Needless to say, this is something that you hear a lot, and I thought it would be a good place to start today's show. Now, I have to tell you, I have to preface this by saying that I generally agree with a lot of the advice that David offers to folks. But this piece, I've got to disagree in part, because my view is, and what I work with my clients on, is trying to find the intersection of passion and money. You can't build a business around simply your passion and chasing what you're excited about and not pay any attention to the ability to turn it into a commercial success. At the same time, I've seen plenty of agencies that have chased after dollars and tried to figure out, where the next new gold rush was going to be, only to find that they didn't really enjoy the work that they were doing or the clients that they were serving. And so I think you really need to find the place where you can be doing work that you love with people that you like and for clients who value you. And that was, ironically, that's something that I had posted on social media earlier this week. So who knows, maybe David was inspired by my post on LinkedIn or elsewhere and said, hey, I can't agree with this Griffin guy. All right, probably not the case, but the fact of the matter is that you need to wake up every day. And there's no reason to be running a business if you're not waking up every day saying, I like what I'm doing. If you're just looking for a paycheck and you don't really care whether you enjoy it or not, just go get a job with another employer or something like that. The whole reason to become an entrepreneur is for the freedom that it brings to chase the work that you want to do and to be excited about it. And frankly, you take on a ton of risk as a business owner. Think about all the stress that you're feeling today with everything that's going on economically, health, social, all of these things. You don't want to take on all of those burdens as a business owner unless you are actually doing something that you like. So make sure that you're finding something that you enjoy. Next, you need to make sure that you're doing it with people that you like. And this may be employees, it may be contractors, it may be vendors, whoever it is. You want to make sure that you are building a business around people that you like to interact with. If you dread getting on that next Zoom call, every next Zoom call, what kind of life are you leading? That doesn't make any sense. Life's too short. And particularly, again, if you're running a business, you have that freedom and you should be making those choices. But now let's get to that last piece of what I had said. You need to be doing work for clients who value you. And value you certainly comes down to the respect piece, but it also comes down to the paying money piece. And that's the chasing the money bit that I think is in David C. Baker's tweet here. So you absolutely need to be thinking about how you can find that intersection, because if you figure out who it is that you like to work with and you figure out the kind of work that you like to do, and by the way, that you're good at, then you can start figuring out, okay, these are the clients that will pay me money to do the things that I like to do. And that's the chasing money, because you can't, there's no way to build a business if people are not going to pay you. So I could go out and say, I'm really passionate about baseball statistics. And I am. I love baseball cards from the 70s and 80s from when I was growing up. Now, can I build a business around that passion? Maybe, but I can't just jump out there and say, hey, I like baseball cards, so I'm just going to talk about baseball cards all day, and, if I make money, great. I mean, I guess you can do that if you're independently wealthy, but most of us are in business because we are looking to make money. And that means we need to find the clients who say, aha, I like what he has to say about baseball statistics or baseball cards, and so I will pay him money for his expertise, for his knowledge. But how do you package that up? That's where you do need to be chasing the money. At the same time, if you're doing that and you're just grinding it out and gutting it out and saying, okay, I need to get this client, I need to take on this client even though I don't like it, I need to take on this project even though I dread it. Well, you may be able to put the money in your bank account and you may be able to pay your bills, and that may work in the short term. And particularly this year, in 2020, you really need to be focused on survival. And so does that mean that some of us may have to take on projects and clients that we may not be enthused about? Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't mean that we need to abandon our passion. It doesn't mean that we should just be looking for that next gold rush. Because guess what? Other people are looking for that same gold rush. And if all you do is chase after the money, you will be both disappointed in yourself, you will be frustrated in what you do, you will be unhappy, and perhaps most importantly, that money's going to run out because everybody's chasing that same gold rush. So don't just chase the money, don't just chase the passion, find a way to bring the two together. All right, so with that, let's move on to the next topic for the day. And how about, why don't we take a look at this question that I got from an agency owner. Let's see, let's bring it up here on the screen. We'll use my fancy-dancy controller to do that. And so this question came from an agency owner, and I'm sort of paraphrasing the conversation that I had with the agency owner, but this is an agency that has seen a significant destruction in revenue and trying to figure out what to do next. And frankly, I've had this conversation now with a few agency owners over the last couple of months, as you can imagine, because a lot of agencies have had great difficulties. Some have held their own, some have increased, but a lot have seen revenue losses. And we've talked about that on previous episodes of this show, where we've looked at some data from Gould and Associates and Gould and Partners, Rick Gould, and others who have shown that we've had 10, 20, 30% losses in most agencies in the PR and marketing space. We've seen layoffs taking place at even the biggest employers, folks like Edelman, Zeno Group, others. So many of you are in this position, but some of you are in an even more dire position where you've lost over half your business. Half of your clients have put you on hold and said, hey, we can't pay you right now. We're going to have to wait and come back. And so at that point, your business really has imploded, and you need to figure out what's your next step. Where are you going from there? And so that's an interesting question. And I think that it's something that requires a lot of careful thought, because when you have a business that's going through that level of economic disaster, destruction, frustration, all of those things wrapped into one, you have to think about the big picture. And instead of just sitting there and saying, okay, I need to run out and replace this revenue. And by the way, I had a conversation with a client earlier this week who was talking about having to replace a client, replace revenue. I hate that terminology. Talking about replacing revenue makes no sense, because if you're running a business, if you're running an agency, you're always out there looking for new business, or you ought to be. You're looking to grow. And so to think about it in terms of, I've lost a client, now I need to replace the revenue, that tends to be when you go out there and you make bad decisions. You make bad decisions about the kind of prospecting you're doing, the clients you take on, the pricing that you set. All sorts of bad things happen when you think in terms of replacing revenue. Instead, you should think about constantly generating streams of new business. And so, as you're thinking about what to do when your agency has imploded or had a serious setback, you need to look at that big picture and think not just in terms of coming up with some new clients and new revenue, although that's probably important because you have your own expenses to meet. You perhaps have payroll or contractors that you want to keep employed. You have business debts and obligations that you need to meet. But you need to think about, okay, what am I doing? How am I positioning my agency? The services that I'm offering, the industries that I'm serving. Do I need to make any adjustments here? And you want to be careful about making a 180-degree pivot. You don't want to sit there and say, okay, well, I've been serving accountants, and now I'm going to go start working for the cruise industry. There's not much of a connection there. But you can make adjustments. You can change geography. You can change the types of projects that you're pursuing or the types of clients. And going back to our first discussion here about passion versus chasing the money, this is also a really good time if you've had that much economic damage to your agency. It's the time to start thinking about, are you doing the work that you love? Are you pursuing your dreams? Because I'm not one of these happy talk people who's like, oh, you need to feel good and happy and smile. Those things are important. But you do need to find that match. And so if your business has been going on a path where maybe you've chased some clients over the last few years that you weren't particularly interested in, or you kept some on, or you did whatever you had to do to pay the bills, maybe now is the time to think about making those adjustments, because when you've gone through that big a change financially in your organization, it is an opportunity to free you up and let you start to think more creatively, because you have frankly, you have less to risk at that point. You've got a smaller business, and so now you can make those changes that maybe you've thought about making over the last couple of years, but just didn't have the time or the inclination or, frankly, the courage to undertake. Now is the time to tap into that and take advantage of those opportunities. But the other thing that you need to do, if you've had this kind of implosion in your agency, is you need to look around and you need to ask yourself, what is it that I am good at? What assets do I have? How can I build from this point that I'm at? And so that means looking at your network. It means looking at your current and past clients. It means looking at the work that you've done the best, that you've enjoyed the most, that you've had the best profit margins on. And so look at those strengths. Figure out what assets you've built. Maybe you have some intellectual property in your business that you haven't even considered. Do you have things that you've created? Have you created reports focused on your industry? Have you created networks of individuals that you share information with? What are some of the things that you could look at that you've already built? Maybe that's sitting on a shelf and just needs to be dusted off and refreshed. Maybe it's talking to people that you haven't talked to in a while. It's looking at the success that you have had in the past. Not just in your agency, but if you've only been in business for 3 or 4 years, take a look back at your past employer. What did you do well there? If you were in an agency, what kind of agencies did you serve well? I think one of the mistakes that a lot of agencies make when they're starting out or when they're trying to regrow out of an implosion is they set the bar too low. And so if you've spent your career servicing Fortune 500 companies and had a lot of great success at that, all of a sudden saying you're going to take that expertise and apply it to small businesses in your community, it sounds good, but it's a lot harder than it looks. And so you really need to build out of that strength and look at where you have had that success previously and build upon that. If you do that, you're going to be able to come out of this disaster a lot more quickly and a lot more successfully. So take a look at those things. Talk to your team, whatever team you still are able to hold on to, whether that's employees or contractors. Talk to your close friends and advisors. Get their feedback. Talk to them about what they think you should do. Try to get as many inputs as possible so that you can chart the path going forward to recovery, but you don't want to just get back to where you were. You want to put yourself on a path to be even better. And so I know it sounds sort of silly and trite and all that, but do try to find a way to make lemons out of lemonade. Look at this as an opportunity to build the business that you always wanted, but just don't have yet. So that's my advice on how to look at things when you implode. Obviously, it's a very difficult time. You do have to focus on survival. It may mean taking on short-term projects and things like that to pay the bills that you might not otherwise, but make sure you have that vision for where you want to go, because if you don't have that, I can guarantee you, you won't get there. If you have that vision, if you have that plan, you are much more likely to achieve it. All right, let's take a look at the next topic here. And why don't we take a look at this question? This is one that I get a lot from business owners generally, not just agency owners, but we're going to take a look at this. And this is a question that came up on Reddit in the agency subreddit not too long ago, where someone was asking about alternatives to QuickBooks for accounting. Wow, this is a really exciting topic. I know you're sitting there saying, hey, Chip, I am so glad that you decided to talk about bookkeeping software, because really, it's Friday. What else would we want to talk about? Okay, well, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it is important. It is something that we in small businesses and agencies use all the time. And so we do need to be thinking about what software we're using. And my answer to pretty much any software question is always, the best software is the one that you're actually using. But I think that to make it a little bit more refined here, what I would suggest when you're looking at the accounting software to use for your agency is, first of all, to remember that it's really a question of which is the least bad accounting software for you to use, because frankly, I've never talked to anybody who says, oh my God, I love my bookkeeping software. It gives me so much joy to use it. It doesn't. It's a necessary evil. It's something you need to use in order to get paid, in order to pay your bills, and so that should be the focus. But the way that you make your selections is taking a look at what are your specific needs. What do you need to have your software do? Does it need to handle invoicing? What does it need to be able to do for style? Does it need to accept online payments? What about recurring credit card payments? All of those kinds of things. You need to look at the way your business is set up and make sure that it is friendly to that. QuickBooks is frankly a great default solution. It's what I've used for most of my businesses over the years. In fact, I think just about every business that I've ever owned, I've used QuickBooks, and that's in every iteration from the old desktop versions, super basic, to enterprise versions on the desktop as businesses grew, and now always in the cloud. So it's not great. It has its issues, but it gets the job done at the end of the day. A lot of agencies use FreshBooks. That's certainly one that you should look at. Generally, smaller agencies and freelancers have the most success there, but it can be applied elsewhere. And there's a ton of others. But you need to start with that understanding of what it is you want to do. So don't start by looking at the software. Start by making a list of what you need, because if you don't start with your requirements and instead you start looking at software, you're going to start imagining requirements and say, oh, well, not imagining it, but you're going to sit there and say, wow, I never thought about doing this. I should have this capability too. And that's, you don't really want to do that, because then you start layering so much complexity on what you're looking for that you'll probably buy something that you won't use fully and pay too much for it. But the other thing that's really important when it comes to accounting software in particular is making sure that whoever is your bookkeeper and accountant, they're comfortable with it. And so again, this is one of the reasons why I like QuickBooks. I've never run into a bookkeeper or accountant who doesn't know how to use it and isn't already set up to use it within their own systems and import the data and all that. But you do want to take a look and talk to them. So whoever's preparing your taxes, whoever's doing your payroll, if you don't do it through a payroll service, and frankly, if you're not doing it through a payroll service, shame on you, because that's not the kind of activity you want to have to do yourself anymore. Believe me, back in the day, I used to file my own quarterly payroll returns with the government. Pain in the butt. Don't do it. There's so many great services out there. Many of them will integrate with your bookkeeping package, though, so you want to make sure that that happens. If you're selling things, selling services and charging through credit cards, make sure that the tools that you're using work. So if you're using Stripe, for example, make sure that that's integrating with whatever package that you have. If you want to use QuickBooks and have the payments directly through them, great. That's something that they handle. It's not the smoothest. There are better ways, particularly if you're looking to do automatic monthly credit card payments instead of folks paying by credit card manually each month off their invoice. It's not the best for that, but take a look at those different options. Talk to your bookkeeper if you've got someone in-house, an office manager who's doing that. You want to make sure they're comfortable with it. If you've got a part-time bookkeeper or a service out there that you're using, make sure they're comfortable with it. And of course, there are options other than going with a pure DIY software solution. So there's a company called Bench, for example, and I know a number of agency owners who use Bench, and that's sort of there's a human layer on top of their own software that takes care of a lot of the recording of expenses and producing reports and that kind of thing. So that may be an option to look at as well, instead of looking at simply the off-the-shelf or off-the-cloud, if you will, software platform like QuickBooks or FreshBooks or those kinds of things. So absolutely take a look at it, but start with those requirements. That's probably the best place. Make sure that your team is comfortable with it. Whoever's going to be touching the product needs to have that ability to work with it easily. Otherwise, you're going to be in for a lot of a pain and suffering, and frankly, you probably end up paying more too. I mean, if your accountant or bookkeeper aren't comfortable and they have to learn on the go with you, that's going to be a problem, or you're going to have to do more work yourself to produce the reports and export the data that they need. So, all right, enough about accounting software. Again, it's Friday. You want to be thinking about other stuff beyond that. So, let's take a look. Let's see, where should we go next? How about this? How about we go to... let's see, here we go. So this goes along with the question of businesses that have had to make adjustments during this time. And a lot of agencies are seeing that the work that is coming in right now, the topics that are being discussed with prospects and clients, are not about long-term retainer work, and instead it's focused on short-term projects. And for agencies that have not done a lot of their work this way, and frankly, a lot of PR and marketing agencies have made retainer work their bread and butter. It's the preferred way of working, and I get that. Monthly recurring revenue, a term that sort of tended to come more out of the software as a service industry and those kinds of things, and has now been adopted by a lot of agencies as they've looked at it. Instead of saying retainers, whatever you want to call it, that fixed monthly amount, that's something that it sounds great, but I think one of the things that we've all discovered through the course of the last few months is that it's not really as guaranteed as it looks. It's not as predictable as it looks. When bad things happen to individual companies or the global economy or pandemics or whatever, that retainer revenue can dry up very quickly. So it sort of becomes a lot more fragile, and you understand it to be more fragile than you perhaps thought it to be at first. So if you are an agency and you're thinking about, how do I make this adjustment from, working with clients on this long-term basis where we get $2,500, $5,000, $10,000, $25,000, whatever it is a month, and we kind of throw a bucket of services in there and we just kind of do what's needed. And instead, now we're talking about doing project-based work. It is absolutely an adjustment. It's an adjustment for you as far as how you price things. It's an adjustment for you as far as how you work with your team. It's an adjustment for you as far as how you work with your clients. And so you need to think very carefully about the adjustments that you need to make in order to be successful in this more project-based world. But what I'll tell you is that project-based work can be much more profitable. It gives you a much higher level of flexibility to price correctly, to make pricing adjustments over time. It aligns the interests of the agency more closely with the clients because you are building things or doing things for them that have more immediate results, that they're tangible. And it means that the client is happier with that. They can kind of wrap their minds around it. It leads to less in terms of over-servicing. One of the big problems with monthly recurring revenue and retainers and long-term engagements is that typically if you were to look at a chart over time, you would see that the amount the client pays stays steady, but the amount of work that you do as an agency tends to gradually increase over time. And part of that's because expectations become grander. Part of it is because you get more and more afraid to lose that client over time. And so you say, I need to do whatever it takes to keep them. And that's a real problem for agencies right now. I know a lot of you out there are in that mode where you just say, I can't lose another client. I can't lose any more revenue, so I'll do whatever. And That's a dangerous, slippery slope to be on. I'm not saying don't do it, because you do need to make sure that you survive this period, and that is the number one rule for 2020 is survive. But at the same time, you need to be realistic about the expectations that you're now creating with your clients, and what they expect to get for those retainers. So as you're looking at moving to more of that project-based work, at least here in the near term, as this is what folks are looking for, it's an opportunity for you to start working with your team and making sure that they understand what are the expectations. So the team needs to understand what you're planning to put into projects as far as time and resources. They need to more carefully understand timelines, because when you're talking about retainers and monthly revenue, you sort of just kind of chug along, and it's almost like being an employee with an organization, and it takes away some of the sense of urgency. With project-based work, it increases that sense of urgency, in part because the client is expecting something and they want to see it as soon as possible. But frankly, it's important for you as an agency owner too to focus on the urgency, because the sooner you deliver the project, the sooner that you get that final payment in most cases, and the sooner you can start talking to that client about the next project and continuing to grow it. And so that's a piece of adapting to this project-based world. You need to look at what you're doing for projects, not in terms of just one and done, but you need to look and say, okay, once I complete this project, what's the next step? How can I use this as a building block, as a foundation for the next project and the next project after that? So have that view in mind and start talking to the clients about that sooner rather than later. Plant that seed so that they can see what's potentially coming and where they can be going with things. And just got a great comment here from Roxanne, who says that project visibility also makes it a good showcase for your skills. And that's absolutely true. That is one of the great things about project work, is it lets everybody shine a spotlight on the work that your team is doing, and it helps the client appreciate it more. Now, the flip side of this is it also exposes warts and all. So if with a retainer, you can kind of just throw lots of extra bells and whistles in to cover up for shortcomings. Project-based work, not so much. So make sure that you're using it to showcase those skills and those talents and that success, and you're not inadvertently putting the light on work that you are not doing as well. And so that means in a project-based world, you also have to be careful about what you say you can and can't do, right? You need to think about what your claims are. And this is a problem that we all have in the agency world from time to time. A client says, hey, can you do X? And you're like, sure, I can do X. Why not? Will you pay for it? Yeah, absolutely, I can do it. Well, that sounds great until you actually have to deliver on X, and that becomes a problem if you don't actually know what you're doing or you're not particularly good at it. So make sure that as you take on project work, it's very closely aligned, right? So that's part of making that adjustment as well. Part of that may mean that when you do project work, you also have to partner more successfully with other agencies or vendors or freelancers and contractors to make sure that you're delivering what's needed on the timelines that are needed. Because again, project-based work tends to have compressed timelines for everybody's interest, so you need to find ways to be more elastic in your delivery and more flexible in the kinds of services that you can offer. So take a look at that as you're making the adjustment. Now, the other piece about project-based work is the pricing part. And we'll have a show here in the next couple of weeks about pricing generally, because this is a question that I get, well, frankly, every week I get asked about pricing by at least one agency owner. And when it comes to projects, you do need to be more careful, because with projects, you can't just make it up in the next month by perhaps finding a way to work a little bit less, right? So if you misprice a project, you can be in a lot of trouble. And so you want to be careful about it. Now, the flip side of that is, if you price this project wrong, you have a better chance of pricing the next one right, whether it's for this client or the next one. And that's something that you don't have in the retainer world, because you can't really very easily go to most clients and say, well, you're paying me $5,000 a month, but we're really doing $7,500 worth of work. You can do it, it's just not often successful, because clients more often than not push back against those fee increases unless they're seeing a tangible increase in what they're getting. So that's an area where project-based work can help you. So bottom line is lots of possibilities when it comes to project work, and a lot of challenges come along too, but it's the kind of transition that many agencies are having to make right now, and just know that you can do it quite successfully. All right, let's take a look at the next topic here. Let's see, what do I have here on my next card? There we go. All right, so this is another question. Let me make sure I bring up the right screen here. All this fancy technology these days, it's but being the producer and the host all at once is sometimes challenging. So in any case, so this will be the last topic that I have, although if anybody has any questions or comments that they want to have me cover here at the end, I'm happy to do that as well. But this topic here is setting boundaries with difficult clients. And this is something that comes up all the time in my conversations with agency owners, agency leaders, because truth is, we've all had difficult clients. We probably all have them even today. And there's degrees of difficulty when it comes to difficult clients. I didn't really intend to do that, but you get the point. So thinking about how you set boundaries appropriately here can be important. And we just talked earlier about how we're all trying to do whatever we can for our clients to hang on to them and hang on to revenue right now. So it becomes even more challenging to set those boundaries, and we kind of let them keep creeping. The problem is, whatever boundaries that we loosen up now, they're only going to get worse. They're only going to stick with those clients. Generally speaking, it's very, very difficult to rein in difficult clients and set those new boundaries. It's not impossible, but it is very difficult. So let's talk about boundaries in two different ways. And so the first thing is, the best place to set those boundaries is before someone even becomes a client. So during the prospecting stage, when you're working with someone and talking to them about potentially coming on as a client of your agency, that's when you want to start thinking about setting appropriate boundaries. You want to think about everything from how you interact with them and how you respond to them during that prospecting stage. So if they're sending emails at 1 a.m. and you're responding at 2 a.m. and all that, it starts to build that sense that, oh, this is how we work. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't respond in a timely fashion during the prospecting stage, but do remember that every action that you take there, and as high as you jump during the prospecting stage, is as high, or at least the minimum height, that client will expect once they come on board with you and start actually paying you. So think about boundaries from that standpoint, and think about them then once they actually start transitioning into becoming a client, and how you and your team are working with them. So now let's look at the existing clients, the more challenging ones. How do you reset those boundaries for an existing client? And the first thing is, and I'm going to say this, and it's going to be shocking to all of you because we're all in the communications industry, but it comes down to communications first. You need to have actual open lines of communications with your clients, even your difficult ones. And so you need to be willing to talk to them and say, hey, here's the challenge. And I'll be honest with you, I've done this a lot over the years, and quite often I have been surprised at how receptive a client has been about looking at how we can rejigger how we work with them. And you don't typically go to a client and say, hey, you're difficult, we need to fix that, right? That's not really the best approach in most cases. But if you go to a client and say, look, we need to reset expectations on turnaround times, or we need to streamline the flow of information. So maybe we, batch requests, and, instead of constant email back and forth or text messages or whatever, maybe we take a look at setting up weekly or semi-weekly or whatever types of meetings we need to have in order to condense the flow of information. Maybe we need to set expectations better about turnaround times. So having those open lines of communications and talking directly with the client who's difficult can often lead to good things. But the truth is that you also need to look at how far you're willing to go. What is your ultimate expectation here about what you can and can't do? So if I sit there and say, okay, I've got a very difficult client, but there's no way I can lose the revenue, right? Because I absolutely need to hold on to it. Well, then you have to be a lot more gentle in those communications, and you have to kind of do slight little nudges. And there are ways that you can sort of, if you gradually elongate response times and you work to to sort of streamline meetings, even without necessarily having an overt conversation. There are some subtle things you can do, but that only gets you so far. So if you're not willing to risk that revenue at all, the odds are it's going to be very, very difficult to get the boundaries that you want. But you're certainly not going to get there if you don't communicate with that client in some fashion. Now, if you're willing to risk that revenue, if you're willing to say, hey, you need to adjust to our new rules or we're going to let you go as a client, well, then you have a lot more flexibility in how hard, how far you can push. And again, I have been pleasantly surprised over the years about how when I've been willing to risk a client revenue stream, when I go to them and I say, look, this is just not working for us. It is not, the amount of money that we're getting paid is not appropriate to the level of work that we're doing or the turnaround time that we have or those kinds of things. I have been very pleasantly surprised by how well most clients that I've done that with have responded. Not all of them, and I have lost clients this way, but most of them are willing to at least entertain the discussion and figure out how they can make those adjustments. So if you're willing to put it at risk, you are going to be in that much stronger position to have the outcome that you want. Now, let's talk about the difference between a difficult client and a toxic client, because there is a difference. There are plenty of clients I've had over the years that are just difficult. They're not easy to work with. Their expectations are out of whack. But toxic clients are a different thing. And toxic clients, as an agency, particularly if you have employees, you need to avoid like the plague. And if you've got them, you need to get rid of them. And I know that that's tough medicine. That's not what you want to hear. But toxic clients can almost never be fixed. Toxic clients are the ones who are just straight up abusive to your team. They are the folks who have no regard for other people. Fortunately, there aren't that many of these folks. Most people fall into the difficult but not toxic category. But if you have clients that do fall into that toxic category, you need to cut that off right away, because otherwise you're putting your whole team at risk. You don't want to force your team to work with people like that, because it will make them less likely to stick around with you. And we all know that agencies are about talent. You need to keep the right people around in order to be effective. And that's not going to happen if you keep those toxic clients. So difficult clients, deal with them before they become a client. Deal with them as you're onboarding them. If you have to, if you've got an existing client that's become difficult or that was difficult from the get-go but you didn't deal with early, there are ways to do it, but it really comes down to how much you're willing to risk in terms of the revenue in order to fix that relationship. So let's see, other comments have come in here. And so Roxanne has chimed in again here. It's important that the agency leadership are on board with decisions to open this conversation. It has a level of risk. It absolutely does. It has a level of risk. You need to make sure that you and your team are aligned. Obviously, if you are the owner, you get to make decisions on your own, but you also need to think about the folks who are working directly with the client, and you need to get their feedback and not just make independent decisions, because obviously it does affect everybody. And if you've got team members who have ideas as to how they can work with those difficult clients and how they can adjust those relationships, that's great. If they're saying, look, I don't want to put my job at risk, so I'm willing to deal with whatever, you should listen to that. But at the same time, you do need to make a judgment as an agency owner as to whether that's good business or not, because employees, we're all self-interested to some extent, but you need to be careful about the employees who are willing to burn themselves out or take on extra abuse in order to just keep the client because they think that's the only way to keep their job. Hopefully you are continuing to do things to grow your business, find new clients and that sort of thing, so that hopefully if you've got these difficult clients, you can find ways to move on from them over time instead of feeling like you're stuck with them. The reality is you're never truly stuck with a difficult client. You can always let them go. It's just a question of what the consequences are. So with that will bring us to the end here of this week's Friday Free-for-All. It's been great covering all these topics. Thank you, Roxanne, for the comments. Obviously, if others of you have comments, I'll keep an eye on the feeds on Facebook and YouTube after this. So I'm always interested in what you all have to say and suggestions you may have for the show going forward. And so now, as I promised, there is an announcement about future shows, and that is that starting next week, starting on Monday, this show will be going 3 days a week. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time, so 9 Pacific or 5 o'clock if you're in London, or all sorts of other times in other time zones. I'm not going to go through them all because most of you can figure it out for yourselves what time would be in your time zone. In any case, I will be live talking about topics Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, noon Eastern Time. Monday and Wednesday, I will have set topics to discuss, but then I'll take any Q&A at the end. If you've got questions, bring them along. I'm happy to answer anything agency related, or, well, I'll answer things that aren't agency related too, but that's not really why you're probably tuning in. But if you want my thoughts on the Red Sox season, well, if we have a baseball season, I'm happy to share those too. So Monday and Wednesday will be topics. Friday will still be sort of this all over the map, whatever has struck my interest from conversations I've had with my coaching clients, with other agency owners that I've spoken with, or things that I've seen online, articles that I want to react to. And so we'll keep that format, and we'll see how it goes. Again, I'm always looking for that feedback. So if you have suggestions for topics, if you have suggestions for format or anything like that, I am always happy to hear that. And see, now I forgot to take the difficult clients question off the screen, so you didn't get to see a nice big image of me for as long as you should have. But I guess that's probably a win for you, particularly since I'm wearing this bright red shirt today. I guess I wasn't really thinking too clearly about how that would look on camera. But in any case, so thank you all for joining. Thank you for listening in, whether you watched live or on replay. If you've watched live, then have a great weekend, and I will see you back here next week.